someone keeps on beating me, someone keeps on taking pictures and want me to look at them, and I don't have time.
You're good. You're on. You're on.
Am I ready? Okay. So I'm videotaping this. Is that what they call it? Videotape. And you might want it on YouTube whether you like it or not. So anyone have to sign off before they become famous? I get 10% of whatever you earn. Does that work?
Speak up.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, just make sure
Can I
you.
speak louder?
Louder, please.
Yeah, but today
Nobody can hear you.
Yeah, I wear hearing aids so they can't hear my talk too loud all the time. All of a sudden, you can't hear me. Both of us are from Brooklyn, that's the first one. But he doesn't sound like he's from Brooklyn. I still have the accent. Then we moved to Long Island, and we grew up in Merrick, Long Island. Erica, what?
Louder.
What are you gotta be talking?
People back here cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
No.
You can't?
No.
Listen to your wife. Okay. Anyway, we have, thank you for the Mercedes-Benz Club being here and the Peachtree section. And then I went to the trouble of inviting some of my customers from PermaFinish. And we have the Corvette man way in the back over there. He's hiding. Napoleon. And Napoleon brought 3 or 4 of his friends who also have Corvettes. And 1 or 2 of the guys, one of mine was told was a member of the Mercedes-Benz Club. See that? And they have some. They also have Mercedes besides Corvette. I'm too old for a Corvette, but that's okay. The problem is getting in now. Right. Anyway,
Once you get in, you don't want to get out.
Okay. And then we have these 2 ladies over here have done a couple of cars in the last month or so. Trish and Jan. This young man right here happens to be Harvey. If you ever own an Infinity and you want to have good service, he's a top service advisor at Gwinnett Infinity. These 2 gentlemen over here, this man is involved in F-250, 350 diesels. They rebuild them and everything else. Dana is retired from that. He's a young guy, he's retired. He's the young guy taking his place. So I have a little bit of everything here, a little mishmash. And also, we have back there, we have Michael. And we have some other that Michael is, he does garage floors. Beautiful. And we have a customer of ours who's, I talked to the other day, Larry Donaldson, and we'll talk more about it later. Larry Donaldson, in the last 20-some odd years, he's done 19 cars. He trades cars. I try and talk about it, but he just likes to spend money on cars. We're talking Mercedes, Ferraris, F-150, but he's having his floors done by his company on Monday in his brand new house. And Larry used to be a big executive with Lockheed. What's the official name of Lockheed?
Lockheed Martin.
Anyway, Lockheed. Oh, look, here comes a guy who just had his Jeep done last week, and he brought his son. And if there's no chairs, you have to stand up. Anyway. Sign in, sir. Anyway, Ron.
Sir.
Just sign in.
Will do.
And he needs hearing aids too, I can tell from here. Anyway. Many years ago, we were invited to do some experiments on some panels for Lockheed, and it had to do with the self-bomber. And he told me to tell everybody as a secret what they did with our panel. He said to just tell everybody that PermaFinish works as advertised. So I think the problem was we made the plane shine, and that's the wrong thing to do with a self-bomber. It's supposed to be incognito. Anyway, so without further ado, Bob Padavano.
Good morning. Good morning. Just to give you an idea, we won't go into a bunch of detail on that, but what happened was the stealth planes and boats they're still experimenting today. But one of the problems that they had was the radar systems were designed to pick up the silhouettes of these whatever, airplanes or boats, which they were very successful in doing that, in protecting the boats or airplanes. Then they found out they were still getting picked up on by certain types of radar.
Oh, they jumped, okay.
They couldn't figure out what it was. And what happened was they through experiments and things, they found out that the radar was picking up the shadow of the plane or the boat rather than the physical boat. So they were still working on that to counteract that. And then electronic wise, they were able to even work that out. But that was one of the things that we worked with them on it. And we did quite a few things, but anything that they do, they don't want to shine. They want less glare, so that left us out. They proved that we did what we say it would do, and that is make the paint roughly 30% harder and 15% more flexible, which they were interested in. They also did panels. We did panels for them, and they were big panels, and they were sent to Iraq, Iran, the desert areas. One of the problems that they're having there is airplanes, when they take off and land, and these guys have to come in fast because they don't want to stay in the air, they come in quicker. And some of them were coming in at 200 miles an hour, landing, and the amount of dust and dirt and stuff, it was taking the paint off the planes, the front of the planes immediately. And we did the panels that they applied to those things, how they did with them. And again, it made the paint last much longer. But again, they said we can't have it because they want those planes not to shine, and we were making them shine. So that took care of that. But the other end of it was the idea that it did do what we said it was going to do. We did a bunch of, this is jumping ahead, but as long as you're into that, we did a lot of work for, test work for a couple of airlines. And Delta was one of the main things. And I can give you one quick story. We went down and did some, they gave, what we were trying to do is talk them into doing planes before they had damage done to them, rather than to prevent damage, and they were more interested in correcting damage. Okay, we'll correct damage if that's what you want, but it's more expensive to correct it than it is initially. So we went down and we took, we needed something to work on to show them. And they brought us hatches from the sides of planes. Some of them were this big, some of them were really worn out paint, some of them with different paints. And so we did them, and they liked them. Then they were talking about, well, some of the things were how much weight would be added to the plane. And in aviation, they're always concerned about how much weight. Everybody else's product that was ever brought there always added weight to the plane because everything else on the market was a coating, so it added weight. And they asked us what it would do to the weight, and we told them, if you technically speaking, the plane is going to be lighter when we get done than when it before. And they said, no, wait a minute, you're going to put it on. One of the byproducts of this is the chemical itself actually also cleans the paint, which it's not night and day, but when you get down to technicalities, because of the fact that it's a chemical process, it gets into the pores of the paint and it'll actually clean the paint. It's a minor amount, but if they want to get technical, they weighed the plane before we did it, and they weighed it again when we got done with it. It'd be lighter when they got done with it than before we did, which is the only product that they've ever tested that did that. And it did a lot of other things. Again, we're jumping ahead, but if you guys are interested in it, another thing that it does with aviation is small planes. I don't know if anybody in here is accustomed to or familiar with small planes. Okay, as you know, one of the hazards of flying a small plane without de-icers on them is wing icing. And you take an average normal small plane, and if it gets up into the air and right conditions, moisture-wise or rain or whatever, and it starts to freeze onto the wings, you got a problem. So what they would do is to try to de-ice in the air is they'd go into a steeper dive as they could so that the air would get under the leading edge and lift the ice off. And it does work to a certain point. And again, one of the byproducts of this is the fact that when this chemical process is done, all paint that you spray out of a can, spray out of a bottle, don't matter, when it's on and it dries, if you could magnify it enough times, technically I use this as an example, there is still holes in the paint. They're minute, tiny little things, no matter, they're smaller than you could feel with your fingers across the surface. Now, what happens when it comes to icing, the reason why the ice sticks to the wing as much as it normally does is the fact that when the water gets onto it, the molecules that are in that water are so small, it gets into these little grooves and cracks and stuff in it. And then the water builds up on top of that, and that's what makes it clean. And that's the hard part, it's making it unclean. Again, Tom Henderson, the guy that invented the process, was an aircraft buff. He got into this a long time ago and realized what was happening again is when we do the process, one of the byproducts is it holds the molecules of paint close together. That's where the shine comes from. Anything that you have that you could pull the molecules together. Stainless steel shines because the molecules are closer together, and you can polish it and you can see your face in it. Regular steel, it won't do that. But anyway, if you could take, when you pull it together, that's what gives you the smoothness and the fact that very little will have a tendency to stick to the surface. We have guys that tell us that they drove through a rainstorm and the car was cleaner when they get out the other side than they went in. So now on these planes, what would happen is when we put it on the wings and they flew the same situation, when the ice started getting onto it, when they went into this dive, the ice would come off much quicker. We can't stop ice from going on because that has nothing to do with it, but we can make it much easier for the ice to come off. Those are just some of the little things that you have. And again, in an airplane, it makes a big difference is airspeed. Anything, it does the same on a car, but usually you're not driving, most of us, maybe the guys with Corvettes could go faster, but most of us driving below 150 miles an hour are not going to see much of a difference in fuel mileage. But in an aircraft that could do 200, 300, 400, 500 miles an hour, the smoother you can get the surface, the less resistance, better fuel mileage. And again, we've had guys that we've done airplanes for that were doing, the only way they could really tell are the guys that are into commercial or semi-commercial flights where they go back and forth to New Jersey, 3 times a month or 4 times a month, and they know exactly how much fuel they use. They calculate all that stuff and they know. And then they come back to us and say, Bob, I don't use as much fuel to do that same trip. And he knows exactly what the difference is. So he can tell the difference in doing that. And we've got a lot of that. You could go on and on in aviation. The main thing we want to talk about is a little closer to the ground, and that's you guys. I wanted to do something a little different than we've been doing because we've got some guys that have been here before and we don't want it that boring to make it the same. But it's the same thing, but hopefully a little angle different than what we had before. One of the things that we all have in common, by the way, I don't have a Mercedes, but I have an early Ford. I have a 51 Ford. I'm the early Ford Club, so it just changes names, but we're all in the same boat as far as collectors go. And then we always say, why a collector car? And there's different reasons. Some people buy collector's car because of prestige, pride, it's a hobby, might be an investment. Some people do it for adventure, camaraderie. And then the other thing is, I drove when I was in school. But I bet 90% of the guys and people, women in this room say, well, they can't say wife, but my wife said I could do it. And that's the reason why we own a collector car, as we all know. So,
And they put down they cost too much money, where's that at?
oh no, that's on every one of us. But you can't tell that to your wife, it's very inexpensive.
Oh, I thought he was talking about a lot.
Right. But okay, one of the things that I like to use as, that's in common with no matter why you own your car, and that is maintenance. Maintenance is in common with everybody. Oil changes, cleaning upholstery, rotating tires, wash and wax, which we'll get into. And to me, a very important part of owning a collector car is education. One of the reasons why I like to emphasize education is years ago, we had, due to our ages now, but a lot of guys that had collector cars in their later life had maybe the same car or something similar to that when they were going to school, when they were teenagers. And in that period of time, a lot of guys picked up on the techniques of managing their cars, changing their own oils, doing their own brake jobs and things like that. And then over a period of time, as we started getting older, maybe that's what it was, that people still wanted the antique cars, but they didn't have the background to be able to do the work themselves. I feel that what is very important is for all of us to learn as much as you can about the workings of any part of the car. Not that you're going to go out and get a job as a mechanic. That isn't the goal, unless maybe it is in your later life, who knows. But the main thing is to pick up the lingo and understand what's happening. What I don't like to hear is people were driving down the road and all of a sudden they got a flat tire and they were on the side of the road. And I feel that sometimes if they knew what to expect when their tire was going flat, as an example, they would understand to be able to pull over. There's some people who get a flat tire, they didn't even know they were getting a flat tire. They just got a flat tire. So little things like that. So that also when you went into the service department and you started talking to the service writer and he tells you the Finnegan pin is going bad, you can say, well, now wait a minute. Which Finnegan pin was it? You know, that you could get an idea and speak the lingo about it. So that's why I always say education is very important. Read as much as you can, talk to as many people as you can with the same types of vehicles and that type of thing to get a background. And I feel it's very important. So now, what we're going to talk about here, we're not going to talk about any of these other things for now. That's not what we're here for. We're interested in more into the cleaning part of the car. I don't know how many pages I have in here. When you have to clean a car, you generally wash it, and depending on where you're at, you gotta buff it, polish it, wax it, that type of thing, and use a lot of elbow grease to do it. What we're gonna talk about is the paint itself. Now, a lot of people don't realize what we have to work with when it comes to paint. When you have, the way the paint is stacked up on a car is you have primer, there's a color or base coat, and then clear coat, usually this day and age, over the top of that. Now, what you gotta remember is when you take all of that paint, which most people have a feeling that there's this much paint on their car. In reality, if you take 1 inch on a ruler and take it and cut it into 1,000 slices like bologna, right? And then take only 6 of those slices and stack them up. That's all you got as protection on your car, which will include as I say, the primer, the clear coat, and that type of thing. Now, to give you an idea, most people, when you say 6/1000ths, they don't know really what 6/1000ths of an inch is. This, I'm gonna pass this around, this is a standard feeler gauge, which this is a 6/1000ths feeler gauge. So you can get an idea what you're working with, and just pass it around. That's how thick all the protection that you have on the car. So, what we here are trying to do is give you an idea of how to protect that paint. Because you don't have much. 6/1000ths is not much as it comes around the sea. And in reality, probably a third, we're just gonna say a third of that thickness is primer. And then the rest is what you have. It's amazing. People used to say, well, I took to the body shop and they painted the car and it's gotta be better than the factory, or the factory this, the factory that. You'd be surprised when we have the equipment, a gauge that we can tell you how much is on the paint. And you'd be surprised, brand new cars, Mercedes at one time was putting on approximately 8,000, so in the business they call mils, 8 mils of paint on their cars from the factory. Most of the cars today are coming out with roughly 6/1000ths of an inch of paint. By the way, go back to aviation. That 747 that you see flying around, those planes that you get on them, you know how much paint they put on those? Anywhere from 2 to 3,000ths is all the time. But the paint that they use is much, much better than the automobile paint. But they put less on because of the weight. The less paint they put on, the more people they can stick inside there. So when you're dealing with paint, we have such a small amount of paint, we have to watch what we're doing to it. Some of the things that some of the contaminants, and there's many, many more. Road grime, tree sap, bird droppings, bug droppings, rail dust, tree sap mist, acid rain damage, leaf acid, road tar mist, oversprays, industrial fallouts. These are all things that will get onto your vehicle. And what's important is to realize what this is after it gets on. We can't stop them from getting on because you got to drive it or you got to park it in your garage. Give you an example. People say to me, "Well, I park my car in the garage, so I don't get any of that on my car." Let me tell you this: you park your car in the garage, you have bugs that fly around your garage.
I got a lot in my garage, I'll give them to you.
But every one of those bugs that fly in your garage do like all the birds do. They have a tendency to poop on your car. And every one of those are acids. Road grime is, I'll give you an idea. This is an acid, tree sap, acids, bird droppings are acids, bird droppings, bugs, rail dust, tree sap mist, naturally acid rain, leaf acid, road tars, depends on what type it is, road tar mist, oversprays of paints, industrial fallout definitely could be acids. And what's wrong with acids, acids will burn into the surface of your paint. So what do we do to protect it? Most guys say, well, I wax it. Waxing is good if you leave it in the garage. But the first time you wash it, most waxes are either gone or almost gone. So people say, well, I put wax because their hobby, they put 2 coats of wax on their car, or they put 3 coats of wax on their car. And if you ever get a chance to measure it, after you get done with the 3rd coat and you measure it, you got 1 coat. The reason for that is because when you put the 1st coat on, it coats the surface. When you put the 2nd coat on, it actually dissolves the 1st coat, and you still get done with the same thing. So with the 3rd coat, you may have caught more areas that you missed, but you're not gonna get more protection with a third coat of wax, because the nature of wax, the second coat will soften the first one and so on. So you have that kind of a problem. Again, it's no big deal, but in your mind, instead of feeling better, now I'm gonna make you feel worse, wasting all that elbow grease on it. But now, some of the things here that most people are not, leaf acid. Again, if you go out in the rain, let's say in the fall, when leaves are falling, and the car is wet, and the leaf gets on it, and you know how it is, you stick, like stick to the water. We have people bring cars into us, and they say, look at this on there, and what it is, it's the perfect shape of a leaf. All leaves have acid in them. It stays on there and it dries in the right conditions. You'll actually burn the shape of the leaf into the surface. Tree sap mist. People don't know what tree sap is. They know what tree sap is. Tree sap is easy, fell on the car, there's a lump there. The tree sap mist. Every leaf on every tree secretes a tiny speck of sap. So people say, well, I don't park on the trees, but you drive down streets with trees. When you drive down the street with a tree, you're gonna get acid on the car. So it's there. All these things are almost impossible not to get over a period of time. You may get one. Go ahead, you can say something. You want to say?
Do you know the effects of pollen?
Well, it depends on the pollen. Some pollens are like some tree saps. Some tree saps don't have much acid in them, and others do. So that's the same thing with pollen. Depends on where it came from to how much. But it's very hard to see pollen even under a microscope.
Except
with
for
what we
here,
do.
with pine pollen season.
Oh, no, I mean individual pieces. Yeah, you can see the yellow, I mean, you don't even need a microscope for that.
green.
Right. Yeah, but what is each piece of that pollen is doing to the surface is what we're talking about. I think another thing is rail dust. We don't get too much of it, but the terminology rail dust, where that came from is the railroad. If you've ever been as a kid or what have you, even today, you go down alongside the railroad tracks and you'll see rust on all the leaves and stuff alongside the tracks. And people say, well, I don't know what it is, but they don't think. What it is as the train is coming down the tracks, you hear it is the squeaking, that the train is actually sliding back and forth. What that's doing is wearing out, because of the weight of the train, is wearing out the track and wearing out the wheel. And that is grinding. And what it does, it creates a rail dust, metal dust. And going down the road, the wind grabs it, goes up into the air, and it settles on what's near it. And the terminology rail dust, they use it nowhere even near the railroad track anymore because it does the same thing. When it gets into the air, comes over and it settles on your car. If it stayed dry completely, most of the time it won't do any damage to your car. The wind will blow it off and you're okay. Now, some industrial areas you go through, you'll get rail dust out of their chimneys, out of their exhaust systems and that type of thing get into the air. But now what happens is you get some of this rail dust that floats and gets onto your car. You park it outside at night, you get dew on the car, water and metal together, you form rust. Rust is an acid. We see it a lot when we use a microscope. We can tell what it is. In fact, rail dust gets so bad that the rail cars that you see cars on the railroad trains, they put plastic on it. People have all different ideas of what the plastic is for. One of the main reasons is to keep the rail dust off it. For a long time, we had cars in here that we used to do all the new cars.
Especially Ford products.
Well, yeah, Ford was a problem, but it didn't matter, because if it was on the train and they drove it for any length of time, you had rail dust on it. And it's very hard to get rail dust off. It's very small, but it's there. And some of the manufacturers were having to repaint cars because it would burn in so deep that it would do that. But again, not to emphasize only one thing, but every one of these things, and there's probably 100 more that we don't even have down here, that will give you problems. I'll mention one thing, road tar, which was the road tar itself. Road tar itself is not a problem. I mean, you know where it came from. You went through a wet area of tar and it gets up onto the car, you got road tar. Road tar mist is, you get roads, blacktop roads, your tires, they work so good as far as grip on the road, is that actually, the radial tire gripping that road so well on a warm day, doesn't even have to be a hot, warm day, will actually take the tar off the surface, not big clumps, but tiny, tiny little pieces of tar get into the air, and you're driving behind that car, and now it's on your hood. It's outside in the sun, it bakes onto the car. You're gonna wash until you're blue in the face, you're not taking that tar off. You gotta remove the tar. Most guys will use a buffer to take off that kind of thing. Now, again, let's get back to where we're aiming for this. Almost every one of these that will not wash off with water and soap, people go to a buffer. When you go to the buffer and you're dealing with the thicknesses of paint that we're just talking about, every time you buff, you take paint off. So if you're the kind of guy that has his car detailed once a year, once every 2 years, it doesn't matter. But every time you do it, they take more paint off. And then you get a guy that doesn't know how to use a buffer, you got a lot more paint gone. So that's one of the hazards of these products, is removing it, and that is usually buffing. So what you have to watch for is who does your buffing and who does the waxing. If you say, okay, I'm not going to compound it, I don't think I put any of that. No. But if you're going to use, compound takes it off, takes paint off. Polishing. Anytime you polish your car, you take paint off. And the reason why is the upper surface of your paint is the thing that has a problem with it. Whether it's oxidized, a slight washing scratches, anything in the surface that you want to bring the color back or what have you, you have to take the very top surface off to get to the good paint, so to say. And when you do that, that's more paint out the window. Now, when we, like my Ford now, I've had that now almost 18 years. And any of the other guys that have had their cars for X number of years know that eventually, if you did the old-fashioned way, eventually you're going to have it repainted. Not from abuse, but from care. Because you care that it's okay. You give me some.
I was gonna suggest that it's my time to get up and get him some water.
Right, I appreciate it. But okay, so what we want to do now is figure out how we could protect some of this paint against most of this for as long as we can. And one of the best ways that we know of, not because we own PermaFinish and we do these cars, but it actually is the truth. When we do PermaFinish on a car, the chemical XB9 is the chemical that Tom Henderson came up with. We don't use it too much, the name XB9, but that's what it is. He found out that it was let me back up. When Tom first found that he had this PermaFinish, and he didn't call it PermaFinish at the time, he didn't know what it was. he put it on some, it was an old Chevrolet that he had in his garage. He spilled some on a fender and came out the next morning and said, damn, look at that, now it's all discolored, that type of thing. And what it was is it brought, it happened to be red, and it was his son's car, and it brought the color out. And he didn't know, he had no idea what it was, he wasn't looking for anything to make cars look good or anything like that. And he moaned and groaned about it for a while, and his son moaned and groaned about it, and they painted that, he had to have the fender painted again. Anyway, then going down the road, Tom was the kind of guy that liked to experiment with stuff. And he had some other kind of piece of metal, a painted surface, and he purposely put some more on it, and it changed the color again. And, but what happened is, over a period of time, he said about 3 months, the paint cracked where this got onto it. So he didn't think anything of it. You know Hugh Howell Road right out here? Hugh Howell, the guy that named the road, who happened to be a friend of Tom's. And Tom went to Hugh one day and they were drinking, well, we'll use it. He was drinking coffee, it wasn't coffee, but he was drinking coffee. And he explained to Hugh what he had, and he said, why don't you talk to my friend that's an engineer and let him, a chemical engineer, and see if he could give you some ideas. Sure enough, they got together, and by using a control agent, they were able to get it to where we use it today, where it's a mixture that you put together, and it doesn't cause that kind of problem anymore. It never happened on the car. Then when Tom started doing it, he was doing more aircraft than he was cars. But that's how it evolved into doing it. But what it does is, if you took a side view of a piece of paint and blew it up like this, the chemical, the minute, I'm talking about the minute it's put onto the surface, it's a chemical reaction rather than a coating. You have to put it on top.
Hold it, this is a water break.
Oh,
I'm carrying the water.
Right.
I'm the water boy for the football team. You got it?
Oh yeah, that's good, thanks. So what happens is, the chemical gets onto the surface, and then there's a chemical reaction that happens with the paint. And it penetrates that surface, and it becomes part of the paint rather than on the paint. What it'll do is it will, when it's applied and it cures, it will make the paint roughly 30% harder and about 15% more flexible. Now at first, they said, no, he did not come up with a way of making it harder or making it more flexible. This is all reaction from the original chemicals. Now, how we're going to benefit in the automotive end of it is by making it 30% harder. Any surface that you could make harder, whether it's wood, metal, anything that's harder will have a tendency to be smoother, or you could make it smoother. You could polish a material. If you took poured concrete, although nowadays they make concrete that you can polish, but that was a bad example. Maybe a red brick, and you try polishing it, there's only a certain amount, it's still going to be porous and that type of thing. But by doing this, when it pulls the molecules of paint closer together, it makes the paint harder. And when you make it harder, it automatically shines and will also bring out the color. Go back to
Your example of this, earlier,
right. That's right.
this is stronger than that,
Right, exactly.
is what came to mind.
It does. It makes the surface, when you bring the molecules together, it closes the pores.
That in itself makes it stronger.
Exactly. Without doing anything else. So by making it stronger and bringing out the color, go back to Delta. When we went in on they were giving us these panels. The shop foreman happened to be a real jerk, but anyway, he was like, I don't believe it. Everybody comes in here with a miracle elixir and nothing works. But we wanted to show him what it'll do on new paint. So he says, all right, I'll show you new paint. I had a guy in here just the other day that was selling us new masking tape. And we have a panel that's just been painted with his tape. And it's red, white, and blue, their colors. So we said, bring it in. So we bring it in, put it on the table. And we always like to do before and after. So what we do is we tape it in half, you know, and do PermaFinish on one side and on the other side. So while we're doing that, he's asking a whole bunch of questions, and he says, let me ask you this, will it change the color? I said, no, it won't change the color at all. So, okay. So we did it, we went to lunch because we had to have time for it to cure. And finally, we come back, and he comes in, and one of the first things, he looks at it and he says, I thought you said it wasn't going to change the color. I said, it doesn't. He says, well, look at the difference. They just painted that yesterday. That's brand new paint out of the can. And now look at yours. Okay? So he goes into the office and comes out with his color swatches. He says, he puts it down on his paint that was just painted and what we did. When we got done, the paint was closer to the right color swatch than it was when they came out of the can. And he says, oh, damn. All of a sudden, we got his attention. And he was more of a believer in it. But that's just some of the things. Now, there's color right there. Right? What did it do to the color to your car from yesterday to today?
It deepened the color of the paint.
It brought out the brilliance.
I'm gonna pass some of these around, but it's,
That's fresh off the press.
this is his car. Oh. The top one is before, the final one's after. Don't be keeping these now, because these are expensive, they're $1.50 a piece.
But anyway, that's what I'm trying to say is that one of the byproducts
One of the
of
problems with this is.
Oh, we're gonna pass them out.
it. Yeah.
There is a difference, but I'm not
Oh, yeah.
clear if it's all paint or the difference in lights.
The only thing I can tell you is, let me tell you, I saw it yesterday morning when he brought it in. And he's lived many years on the car, so he knows what it is. But yeah, it'll bring out the color. It'll bring it back to what the original color should look like. Again, it sounds funny, but I can tell you this. We've done cars at a dealership where people, when they saw the car on the showroom floor, they thought that's what the color was going to be when they owned it. When we got done with it, they couldn't believe the difference in guys that have done any painting on any cars will know. When it comes to painting, you could take two guys to paint that car. One on this side of the car and one on the other side. Take the same paint out of the same can, put it in two exact spray guns, and put one on one side and one on the other side. This car will be two colors. Because of technique in how you put the paint on. Some guys like to spray 8 inches away from the paint from the car. Some guys like 12 inches. Whatever it is, it changes the color of the paint. But the color, the true color is on the car, but it has to do with mixing of air and paint, makes it change colors. When we get done with this, it'll bring, whatever the original color should be is what you're gonna have when you get done. Okay, so now, we can make the paint harder, and by making it harder, it does, the other thing that a lot of guys like about this is the front of the car. We can't stop rocks. We can stop most of your sand chips. Because you get hit with a rock, you got problems. A rock is a rock, you know what I mean? And there's a fine line between the two. But okay, so if we could cut down on the amount of chips that are on your car, the better. Now, we talked about 15% more flexible. That comes into the picture here. You take any paint, bring it to any body shop. If you want it to be brighter in color and shinier, what do? They add hardener. When you add hardener to the paint, it will make it brighter. But what happens is now it becomes more, you get more chips in it because it becomes brittle. Coincidentally, when it makes it more flexible as well, the flexibility being more flexible will cause the paint to protect it from the chips, because it has a tendency to be flexible and the stone will bounce off quicker than being chipped. So that gives you a much, much better protection on your car. We do a lot of motorcycles.
Where are the keys to your truck?
Your
Your age, you forgot.
No, it should be in my jacket.
Now, he has an old red truck, the PermaFinish, 2002 or so.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna pay my guy extra money to wash his truck right now. And he's gonna bring it back, and we're gonna park in front of that door right there, so you can see, what year is that truck?
02.
02. How many miles on it?
185.
Yeah, he had a couple of chips on the hood, but he needs to change the windshield, that's how bad he's going through, but it didn't damage the hood.
I don't wanna say anything, but
Change your windshield, okay.
people still think the truck is new when it's washed. And I should take better care of it than I do, but it's my combat vehicle. But I can tell you this, if you look at that truck close up, you'll see there's more marks on the chrome than there is on the paint on the front. But anyway, but again, back to your car, why you want it, why it's a better deal, because of some of the things we just talked about. By making the paint harder, it also resists more acid. And by resisting more acid, you don't get as much trouble with acid rains and all the other things that have acid in it, because it will protect it from it. Now, I can't tell you that it will prevent any acids, because if you get a bird that ate at the Mexican restaurant overnight and came out the next morning, it's possible there's enough acid in it to give you a problem. But I'm talking about everyday use, you will prevent it. Now, all we recommend that you do to protect the paint is wash it on a fairly regular basis. You don't have to go crazy, you don't have to say every other day I gotta wash the car, but just common sense, wash it, and it has a tendency to keep most of the acids from giving you a problem. As I say, the hardness we talked about, and the longevity of the paint is much better. Now, one reason why we talk about longevity of the paint compared to with or without it. We discussed before, when you get this on it, and every year you take it in for cleaning, they're gonna buff and polish it. When you buff and polish it, goes more paint. That's the reason why with the product, with the PermaFinish on it, you don't do that. You don't have to buff and polish it every 2 years. You keep it clean. People ask, we always talk about the benefits of PermaFinish. You never hear the disadvantages of PermaFinish. And I'm gonna give you the only disadvantage that I know of with PermaFinish is you do not have to wax it. Now people say, well, wait. You think that's a disadvantage? In this respect, when you have a car that doesn't need to be waxed because it looks great, you still can get road tar mist that settles on the surface. You may get, well, not too much of the rail dust, but some of the other things that get onto the surface that just won't come off with water. Every once in a while, you take a fine polish and just go over the car, and your car, when it's done, when you get a chance, well, rub this one here, because I don't think you want to rub this car. But if you touch that car, how smooth it is, this is the same thing that was done as well. So you'll see what I mean about the smoothness. When you know you need something done to it, when you run your fingers over the surface, if it doesn't feel like these, just as smooth as could be, usually, after you wash it, then it's usually something that's stuck to the surface. And my recommendation is use clay. I don't know if anybody has used clay on their cars.
Next question, can you still clay bar it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the clay bar will take it off, and there's a little bit of elbow grease, but it's good exercise, let's put that. But it wipes off, and then technically you don't have to wax it after it. It just takes the stuff off the surface. So it's much easier to wash again after that and stuff. But by the way, I meant to, anybody that has any questions, just let me know. And
I didn't get the chemical that, when the person used, Tom, what's his name, he spilled?
Tom Henderson.
Yeah, what that chemical actually was, or what that he spilled on.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Oh, it's a secret.
Yeah. It's-
You can blindfold the dog.
It's like the Coke formula.
No, seriously,
Oh, okay.
it really is. It sounds funny, but, yes, there's about 3 of us that still know what the original chemical was and what the mixture is. There's,
Was he the inventor of it or somebody else? Was Tom the inventor, the guy who accidentally spilled it on his?
yeah, Tom is the one that originally found this chemical.
Okay, okay.
And then he was curious enough to find out why it was doing what it did.
I got you.
And then George Hopkins, Tom was not an actual chemical engineer or anything.
Okay.
George Hopkins was an actual chemical engineer.
Got it, okay.
And then, George worked with, Delta, he worked with, Georgia Tech. He knew people at, a couple of different, places that did, very in-depth chemical, formulas.
Okay.
How we found out that it was not a coating, at first both of them thought it was a coating, because it was on the surface and they didn't know of anything else. When they took it to, Georgia Tech, chemical department, George knew people in there, and they were able to take a piece of paint, and it doesn't matter, any piece of paint, and they photographed it from the edge this way of the paint. And we got pictures in there from it, and yeah, well, this gives you an idea of it. But we have pictures of that same 6,000 paint, that now the picture is this thick. And you could see the definite different layers in it. And then that's when you could see how the chemical penetrated into the surface rather than just being on the surface. When this is done, when PermaFinish is done, you could wash that car 100 times, 200 times, and there's nothing to come off. There's nothing to come off when you get done. So you don't have to worry about it going away. You could leave it in the sun.
Can I say something? Just don't go to a car wash with these bristles. You don't want to go to a car wash who has all these
Oh, brushes.
brushes and that scratches the car.
We always recommend if you can get away with car wash, nowadays it's tough unless you only hand wash, to get them without the brushes. Because eventually brushes, you do it enough times, and if the brushes are brand new and they put them on, out of the box, you generally don't have much trouble because of the types of bristles that they're using. The biggest problem is if there was a pickup truck that was bogging right before you came into it, the dirt that's on those brushes now will start to scratch your car. The brushes generally are pretty good, but years ago when the brushes first came out, we never recommended because I think they used straw.
So what's the difference between this and these people that are putting ceramic coatings on cars, or ceramic finishing on cars?
I hate to say this, but the ceramic apparently has some good features, but it comes off. You gotta tune it up, you gotta put a coating on after. And I don't know if in the long run, because it's relatively new, but 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, if it's gonna be as good as they say.
So if you have a car that already has ceramic coating on it,
Mhm.
can you still do your,
Oh, yeah.
how do you do that?
We can take the coating, because it comes off, because it's on the
It
surface.
doesn't damage the paint,
No, we
or
don't.
clear coat or anything?
No, we do it, we could take it off, it's not a problem to do that. But it's not, the idea of it is good, and in fact, Vince had gotten some, and I thought it was in here, but,
He just walked out and got some.
yeah, and he had, was gonna try it to see what, you gotta tell what the competition's doing. And we did it on some used cars, and it's not, I don't think it's worth, like, some of them are $2,000 to put it on some cars. And it varies anywhere from $500 as much as $2,000 for the same $12 bottle that they use.
in the last 3 years, 100 cars through PermaFinish. And of course, like everything else, a few years ago, we were trying to have a little more control. Nothing ever negative happened here, other than the fact we were in Buford, y'all were here. So we hired a detail guy, and he put ceramic on these trucks. We had one truck that we had shipped in, and they brought it in backwards, so the tailgate was against the bugs. He cleaned it, got all the bugs off of it, put the ceramic coating on there. 2 weeks later, all the guts from the bugs came back through that. Brought it here to vents. He straightened it out. I terminated my guy immediately. You know, the thing about when we started selling these trucks, we were selling 10, 12-year-old trucks. Now, we did a lot of motor work and a lot of interior. And I'd bring them to vents and I'd sell them for $28,000. Same truck, after the process, eventually got up to $36,000. So my cost was the same. My profit margin grew immensely because of the PermaFinish. Yeah, it was costing me $650 a truck, but my that 10% investment gave me 100% profit.
Let me tell you this, again now, this is just from people telling us rather than us theorizing. Most people that have PermaFinish put on their vehicles, when they go and trade them in or sell them, will get back, if not all, most of the cost of PermaFinish because of the way the car looks. A car that looks great after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and they go and trade it in. When it looks that good, the dealer will give you more because he could sell it for more. Now, we can't guarantee you that, but I'll tell you, when people tell us this, you'll see the difference. It does make a difference.
Well, the other big plus for us as well, if we had a truck that if the paint was great, anytime you can use original paint, you're much better off. But you'd have to replace the fender and have to paint the fender. Any other process, you've got to wait 2 or 3 months. They could be PermaFinished immediately.
Let me tell you, if anybody's been in the painting business and they know what dry to tape means. Dry to tape means if you were there was another panel here and you put tape on it here and you sprayed this, our process can be done when this tape, and they use the tape so they don't get the fingerprints in the regular paint, but if they can touch this and it doesn't get on their finger, that's known as dry to tape. And that means at that point, it's dry enough that they can take tape off. They can't touch the car yet, so to say, but they can take all that tape off and it's still safe to get near the car. That's dry to tape. This process could be done when that paint is dry to tape. And it will still do the same. It'll cure the same and you don't have to worry about it. Let me give you a reason. When you have a car painted, and years ago they used to do it with brand new cars, but clear coat they don't worry about it too much anymore. But they always used to tell you, do not put wax on this car for a month, 2 months, whatever that manufacturer of paint wanted you to do. The reason for that is paint has to cure, and this is exaggerated, but if the paint was this thick, there's resin, solvents that are down in the paint. Now, as the paint, because of the way the paint is, the solvents have to evaporate through the paint so that it cures properly. If you put wax on top of fresh paint before the curing time is done, it seals the surface. When it seals the surface, now you get what they call solvent pop. The solvent inside has a tendency to accumulate in little areas, and it becomes theoretically bubbles, and it's called solvent pop. People in the paint business know what solvent pop is. And So that's the reason why they tell you do not wax the car immediately after you've had paint jobs or fenders. Yes,
I had my car done, a week ago, and he told me not to wash it, for 2 weeks. Why is that?
all right, let me tell you this, the reason why, it's, a lot of times we'll tell the customer, don't, wash it for a minimum of 2 weeks with soap or heavy rubbing. Because it takes approximately, 1 week to start to cure, or a cure period where it's indestructible. Even, well, let me back up. When we get done with it, it drives out this door, you could take it to Alaska. No problem, go do what you wanna do. But if you're talking about ideal situation, we cannot tell what car wash you're taking it to or who's doing the car wash. Because some of these car washes use dirty rags or bad brushes and that type of thing. So while the paint could be a little bit, so to say, soft, we just said it's a blanket thing. Don't wash it for a week or so, and then do what you want to do. But that's the only reason. Technically, you can wash it if you do normal, use chamois and that type of thing, and do it. You can wash it tomorrow morning. It's not going to hurt. We just are afraid to tell that as a blanket thing because we don't know where you're going to have that car wash done. So we just say, hey, back off for a little bit. But other than that, there's no.
Can you just wash it with water? Just wash
Oh,
it
yeah,
out?
you can just
But no
hose it.
soap?
A lot of people just hose it down.
Yeah.
Most
no
of
soap
most
for
of the
2
dirt will
weeks.
come off with it, just hosing it down. But you know.
And the paint needs a cure, and that takes a long time to cure. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
Let me
Doesn't
tell you.
that take about a couple of months for it to really be hard?
What happens is, because again, we gotta go back to what you're dealing with. We're dealing with a chemical process rather than a coating. The chemical process could take a full year to be 100% cured. You don't have to worry about it. You can't tell if it is or it isn't, but technically speaking, if you could take a light meter and when the car is done like that is now, and measure the brightness of that paint right now, and measured it again in a year, that car is gonna be brighter in a year than it is now. It's not night and day, but it is brighter at the end of that period of time. But again,